up guys, Daniel here, got Darian right there. So today we're going to talk about the OnePlus, the camera review for the OnePlus 6, and right now this is what you're seeing. Audio is also coming out of it, and the camera with the front facing is 16 megapixels and it can shoot up to 1080p, and on the back there's two cameras, a 16 and a 20 megapixel camera. So of course I had to show the low light test of the front facing camera, so here it is. I'm at nighttime in my car and the only light source lighting me right now is a light, the street light above me. So I know a lot of times the front facing camera is not that great with low light. So here's an example. And now let's move on to the back cameras and see how great they are on this phone.
Pictures on the OnePlus 6, it's actually pretty good in daylight. The past couple of phones that I use has AI in them, and usually that would kind of give me a little bit of lag feedback, or I just have to wait until it analyzes the scene. The OnePlus 6 does not have any of that, so while taking pictures and videos, it's actually pretty smooth. It has a telephoto lens, so it is useful whenever you need it. So overall, the picture quality is really sharp, is vivid, I like the colors, and for a mid-tier phone, it's really good. The only con for me is the highlights, which could be a little bit overbearing. Moving on to the portrait mode, it is also great as well. In this mode, there are 3 effects, which is something I did not expect for this phone to have. This first one is taken as a regular portrait mode picture, nothing special. The next one is bigger circles. You can already tell that it's a big difference, and it takes a lot of the highlights in wider spots, and it tries to replicate this more of a blurry bigger bokeh ball effect. Now the mid and darker areas, it doesn't really affect or doesn't really touch those spots. When you take a closer look at the edges of the subject, you can tell that it's not as sharp or not as clean as a regular portrait mode without the filter. Now there are 2 more modes. This one is the heart mode, where you can tell that the bokeh is shaped as hearts, and then there's the star one where of course the bokeh shapes like the stars. I think this is a fun thing to have, especially being in a portrait mode where a lot of people use too, just to have inside that mode. So it's fun and it's different and it's subtle, but I feel like a lot of people will enjoy this. Moving on to a low light interior shots. For me, I feel like it's not as sharp as it could be, and it's not performing as I wish it would. The pictures seems a bit more soft, and the darker spots or the darker areas seems to shift more towards the green side, but it's not as bad as other budget phones or mid-tier phones. And when your subject moves, then yeah, the pictures will be blurry. Well, the subject will be blurry, not the picture, if you're still. Low light in the city or when you're outside with a lot of lights, then yeah, the pictures will be pretty sharp. Now when you look towards to the darker spots, you can tell that there are more noise, and it does shift towards the greener side, like I said before. So when you're taking pictures outside in the dark, try to find a lot of lights. For the camera app, it's so easy to use. You swipe to get to your modes. On the top, there's the different settings for that specific mode. To get to your other modes, just swipe up, and that's it. It's very easy to use. For video, it's also great because I like to shoot in 4K 60, and this phone has it. I've also done a cinematic video using this camera, so I'll link it up there so you guys can check that out after. Another thing that really surprised me is how good the stabilization is when you're walking. So when you slow it down to 40% and add some warp stabilization, it looks pretty good for a cinematic video. For the highlights, again, I still think it's a little bit too much. For daytime recording in 4K 60, it's really nice to have, and for the price point again for this, it's so worth it. It's a great point and shoot camera. You take it out, take the picture, and it looks good. Shooting in low light, there is more noise and is not as sharp, but one thing to look at or watch out for is the glare that you get from the lights. It does get pretty annoying when you are shooting with tons of light around you. Now there is a con shooting in 60 frames per second in low light, which is the image will be pretty underexposed versus 30 frames per second. But the pro of shooting 60 frames per second is in the dark, it comes out sharper than 30 frames per second, which then I can see a lot more noise going on, a lot more artifacts, and you can see the stabilization struggling. So unless I'm standing still, I'll choose the 60 frames per second over 30 in the light. So that is it. That is my review of this phone camera. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.